diplomatic immunity worked until they met human lawyers. Intergalactic law protecting ambassadors from harm proves insufficient against human legal specialists who weaponize bureaucracy with frightening efficiency. Ambassador Kethva from 3. Interstellar Wars, meanwhile, negotiated the peace of two kinds of alien life that communicate by pheromones and electromagnetic pulses, and once convinced two sides warring with each other, war was its participants have been roughly concentrated on watching as snarling animals tear each other apart, towards contentment when their differences over an interdimensional chess game nearly make an entire star system caged out of lighting. What he had failed to anticipate in his 400 years of diplomacy was Margaret Chen. Margaret sat across from him in the sterile conference room of the Terran legal complex, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against a stack of papers that seemed to grow taller every time Kethva blinked his 3 eyes. She wore a crisp navy suit which somehow managed to look both professional but also predatory, and when she smiled, it reminded him of the razor-toothed sand sharks of Valoria Prime. Ambassador Margaret said, with a voice that carried the kind of pleasant tone which experienced diplomats learned to dread, "I trust you understand why we're here today." Kethva's translator implant rendered her words in his native tongue, but something was lost in the conversion. The subtle menace, perhaps. The way she pronounced ambassador like it was a disease she was diagnosing. "I must admit, Miss Chen, I do not." Kethva's voice carried the musical quality of his people, each word flowing into the next like water over stones. "My diplomatic credentials are in perfect order. The Galactic Diplomatic Accord of 2387 clearly states that all ambassadors are immune from prosecution under local law. This meeting violates approximately 47 different articles of intergalactic law." Margaret's smile widened. She opened the first folder in her stack with the reverence of a physician picking up a scalpel. "Oh, Ambassador, you're quite right about that Galactic Diplomatic Accord. If I'm not be mistaken for subsection 12, Article 7. Really, the planet's local law cannot touch us." She extracted a document from her clothes and slid it across the table to him. "But we're not prosecuting you under the local planetary law." Kethva's skin, which usually ranged from a pleasant blue-green to that of his home star, now lurched toward an unaccustomed orange that indicated confusion within his species. With 2 of his 4 arms, he seized the document, while his 3rd arm sought his portable legal database. "This is..." He paused, his translator struggling with human legal terms. "An action in civilian court. A lawsuit, yup. Filed in the Terran Commercial Arbitration Court under the Small Business Protection Act of 2394. You see, Ambassador, when your shuttle grounded last month with no ride bourgeois legal authorization, well, it caused quite a bit of property damage to Lorenzo Martinez's food truck. Lorenzo's been dishing out the finest fusion tacos in this corner for 6 years now. His whole livelihood, for Christ's sake." Margaret opened another file folder. This one was thicker still. "Of course, normally this is simply an insurance matter. Fill out some forms, Delicis Bankum, big check in front of everybody. Smiles come to everyone's face. But then we discovered this interesting fact about your Shuttle-S registration." Kethva-S. Orange skin tone deepened towards red, a sure sign of mounting stress within his system. In centuries of diplomatic service, he had learned that when humans encountered something they termed interesting, it usually meant someone was going to have a very bad day. "The registration is entirely legitimate," he said, his musical voice expressing its first nervous tremor. registered with the Galactic Transportation Authority, under regular diplomatic protocols, of course. But it's like this ambassador. Margaret's voice took on the pedantic, teacher-like tone it had worn while explaining basic arithmetic to a very slow pupil. Just then, Margaret was examining an affidavit. When you registered your shuttle, it was listed as a commercial transport vessel because you want better fuel rates. Really smart. It saved the embassy roughly 30,000 credits in the last year. Another document slid across the table. It's just that commercial ships don't have the same protections as official embassy transports. When it causes property damage, keth. Single quotes, VAR hadn't felt this way since his first year as junior attach. It was no longer the rational concern of a diplomat charged with negotiating difficult issues, but the raw, primitive fear of an animal that realizes too late it has strolled into a predator's den. This is clearly a technical mistake, he replied, his tone becoming more shrill with each sentence. It was always meant as diplomatic transport. Any reasonable thing to do by law will recognize that. Margaret agreed with pity. I think that is obvious. Certainly any reasonable interpretation will see it that way. It's to be included on the list of sad truths about human legal systems. She turned over another folder. It's not always reasonable. What ensued was 1 hour of instruction in legal warfare. Margaret produced paper after paper, each one a finely designed piece of bureaucratic artillery aimed at some minuscule fault in the intergalactic structure of law which regulated diplomatic relations. Margaret soon discovered that the embassy's cleaning supplies were actually purchased through a subsidiary company. It turned out, this in turn put them under environmental regulations. The embassy's telecommunications array did not obtain zoning permits before it was erected. 3 months ago, some embassy personnel called out for delivery pizza, and when the delivery driver came, he was not properly vetted in accordance with foreign dignitary interaction protocols. Each infraction was small in itself. On its own, a small fine and a corrected form would be the sum total of its dispositions. But Margaret had combined them into a legal mosaic that somehow turned Kethfa from an untouchable diplomatic representative into what her documents repeatedly referred to as a foreign commercial entity engaged in systematic regulatory violations. Don't understand, Kethfa said, his skin now shadings of color which his species showed only under great stress. Those regulations, they don't apply to diplomatic missions. The Galactic Diplomatic Accord supersedes all local law. Yes, under normal circumstances, Margaret said, but once your embassy began to function as a commercial enterprise, and it did this when you registered that shuttle for commercial fuel rates, you became subject to our commercial regulations, and our commercial regulations contain some very interesting sections on foreign businesses which do not comply with local law. She opened what Kethfa was beginning to think of as the folder of doom. For instance, the Terran Commercial Code empowers us to seize the assets of any foreign commercial enterprise pending resolution of outstanding violations. Your embassy's accounts, your shuttles, even your own personal diplomatic credentials may be suspended until that time. Its translator implant was sophisticated, but there was plenty of Margaret's talk that Kethfa's translator simply abandoned trying to interpret. Injunction, asset forfeiture, all such terms were rendered but hit back like they were even more aggressive than the original form they came from. Injunction and asset forfeiture, for example, came through as translations that only made them sound more menacing. This is madness, he said. Even as he spoke, however, he could see the awful logic of what she was doing. No court in the galaxy would support such an interpretation. Even if we win, Margaret said. But here is the wonderful thing about human civilization, Ambassador. We do not even need victory at the courthouse in order to win. We merely have to keep you involved our legal system for long enough later, which she put on the table. Between them calendar, she laid a new ones on her wall each night is her progress chart, or replacing them with visited places and came as to some notable features on our 3-year theme. Let's see, ... Filing for emergency diplomatic review of commercial entity status. That's a minimum of 4 weeks. Freezing. The environmental impact assessment for your communications array will take another 6 weeks, presuming there are no appeals. After that comes the zoning violation hearing, ... Oh, we are looking at a delay of 3 months at the earliest possible time. There was no color left in the ambassador's face. His eyes danced with panic. He looked as if one wrong word would send him off the deep end. Even if you win every single case, Margaret went on, and even if every court agrees that this is a ludicrous interpretation of commercial law, you are talking 6 months at Thelest Bear. Your diplomatic papers are completely in order again. Another 6 months in which your embassy cannot function or provide money for your employees, and deadlines mean absolutely nothing to you in any case, because you have since been forced to live back on Earth and get to grips with all of those papers yourself. And the ambassador's skin, in his species, had settled to a grayish-green, indicative of total defeat. What is it that you most desire? He asked, all of Margaret's predatory grin gone from her face for the first time in the meeting to leave. Something which might have been only human feeling. He's been at that comer with tacos or something equivalent for 6 years. Your Excellency, it's more than a source of income. It is all he ever thinks about. Half the profit goes into his daughter's college fund. Insurance was what he called the handkerchief wrapped around his mother's bloody stump after she got run over by a gome, Your Excellency. Not just for wages, but also give him workman's compensation and earthquake damage awards 3. Hit on a business run according to modern standards of humanity is tantamount to wiping out the entire fortunes several times over. Well, let me hear what else Lorenzo-san has to say. I hope to prove the warp dead wrong and come out of court a winner. My ship crashed into Lorenzo's truck. Wasn't starting a fire good thing, even though such fire at least prevented the Gome from collecting the insurance money for it. The company says that alien intervention is an act long excluded as deliberately caused outside nature and not covered under standard policies. 40,000 credits. That's what the truck was worth. While he rebuilds his business, the lost income will be another 20,000 more. If it expands into other areas, and he has to buy new goods, according with those tougher food safety regulations which went into effect last month, you're looking at around 80,000 credits altogether. Kethfer could feel his diplomatic senses beginning to reassert themselves. This was old ground, a negotiation where the line to take and what might be reasonably asked were both quite clear. Yes, the logistics. At least let me point out that your asset forfeiture rules could freeze my embassy's discretionary fund at any time. For human legal systems are so elegant, we can lift individual freeze orders to meet individual needs. Just sign a couple of papers. The embassy was doing business as a commercial entity is committed on an ongoing basis. On it all, here are the papers. That's just a straight business settlement. Has no impact on future diplomatic status, of course. We're not heartless. Upon rereading the text, Kethfer went through it as though his brother had spent a long time at law school, and he had paid attention. For over the past few hours he had learned that among human legal documents there was many a trap, much worse than a minefield. The content was plain enough. A declaration of commercial activity, an agreement to compensate for causing damages, and the promise of preferably sticking to regulations in future. Appears reasonable so far. But deep in the 12th subsection of Article 7 lay a clause that turned his blood to ice. This agreement is a predentation for treating diplomatic missions as commercial entities in cases of regulatory violation, he read. Out loud, just in relation to regulatory matters, Margaret Chen said lightly, nothing that interferes with your diplomatic immunity for diplomatic functions proper. Miss Chen, Kethva said slowly, this precedent could be extended to every diplomatic mission on Earth, every embassy, every consulate, every trade delegation. A minor infraction of regulations might be used as pretext for stripping off the diplomatic layer of protection. There was no change in Margaret's expression, but something darted through her eyes, something holding the look of satisfied ion. It might, she said, if that was an inclination somebody had. The room fell silent, save for the whisper of the air conditioning system. Kethva stared at the document, then at Margaret, then back to the document. Slowly, the pieces started to fit. You're not just Lorenzo Martinez's lawyer, he said. I represent several clients. How many? Margaret opened her briefcase and handed him a folder, which must have been at least twice as thick as any other she had shown him. In my business, there's Lorenzo. Of course, then there's the Merchants Association of Greater New Angeles. They particularly object to foreign entities operating commercial vehicles without a proper license. Then there's the Environmental Protection Coalition, who worry about the atmospheric impact of unregulated shuttle traffic. The Union of Food Service Workers has some reservations about alien technology taking jobs of locals, and the Society for Human Legal Supremacy. Whatever that is, can get quite worked up about foreign bods exploiting loopholes in our commercial code. Each name hit Kethva like a physical blow. These weren't random complaints from individuals who had been inconvenienced by diplomacy. It was a comprehensive attempt to break down the entire concept of diplomatic immunity, one devised by someone who understood human law quite well and also had a good grasp of the galactic legal framework. You planned all this, Kethva said, sorted. Everyone and everything before me out, said this is legal, that is illegal, said Kethva. I looked into it, Margaret explained. There is a difference. They were real, Ambassador. The mistakes with your shuttle registration, your embassy really did commit those regulatory offenses. I just spotted them and turned them into weapons. Margaret closed the case and leaned back in her chair. Ambassador, do you know what the most feared 5-word phrase in human legal systems is? It is not guilty. It is not life imprisonment or death penalty. The papers between them indicated a stunning variety of claim types, but with one unifying force to shoot downward, make less expensive. They claimed that the minor expenditures of Terracent Andor, for various purposes, were genuine work costs. The Skypin was not Tracilian's UDP project, but truly his private domain. Andor and his mother owned an arcane fetish article that would have been destroyed by people unfriendly to it, but it survived nonetheless. Parked at Andor's house and so requiring payment on the pewter spiritude unless wrong, all along this entire time. Highwing, you mean? Gust decided otherwise. I do not ask for much, he concluded, just a natural ending. This lawsuit tortures me. Wise, frivolous lawsuit? because a frivolous lawsuit does not have to be decided in favor of its plaintiff to ruin someone's life. It just has to exist. Margaret indicated the stack of paper between them. This file contains a series of valid claims under human law, she said. Lorenzo is really in the red over damage to his property. We have genuine concerns about environmental consequences. Those regulatory offenses are real. But the legal foundation that underpins the definition and delivery of these claims, it places the significance in a different light. Cathfer's skin had turned a complete grey now, the colour that his people wore in the face of extreme disaster. What you call legal strategy is just warfare, he said. It's Tuesday, Margaret replied. Ambassador, you've got to understand how human legal systems work. We didn't develop them to find truth or achieve justice, though they do that on occasion by accident. We developed them to win. Every procedure, every precedent, all the rules of evidence, every bit of it is there because some lawyer, somewhere, figured out how to turn it into a weapon. She got up and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling complex of government, buildings that housed Earth's machinery. Your people have diplomatic immunity because the galaxy recognizes that diplomats need protection to get their work done, she said. It's a sensible system, rational, designed by people who assumed that laws are there to benefit civilization. Turning back to him, she added, but humans didn't develop our laws for the benefit of civilization, Ambassador. We designed them for our own good. And our own good, in this context, means whichever human being is clever enough to manipulate the law into serving them rather than against them. Cathfer found himself thinking of his predecessor, Ambassador Velthor, who'd served Earth for 20 years before requesting a transfer to what he described as a more peaceful assignment negotiating trade disputes between the crystalline collective and the hive worlds. Cathfer had supposed, at the time, that Velthor was just getting old and risk-averse. Now he wondered whether Velthor had recognized something that Cathfer was only beginning to comprehend. So what happens now? He asked. Margaret returned to her seat and opened up the settlement agreement again. You have a choice now, Mr. Alpers. You may sign this note, pay for the damage to Lord Lorenzo, and observe the regulations in any business matter entered into. Your diplomatic immunity holds, your embassy goes on working, ... and the whole affair comes into the cold storage. She tapped the pen down on the signature line. Or, he continued, you can contest it. Every single point that comes up can be taken to court. You argue for diplomatic immunity against municipal law and hope the judges eventually bought your line. And if I do contest it, Margaret's smile returned, brittle as ice. Then we'll see just what kind of damage human lawyers can, due to interstellar relations. Because, Ambassador, this little meeting we've just been having, that's me being nice, offering reasonable terms in exchange for upholding the public interest. She opened her briefcase again and took out another file, this one marked with red tape. If you want to fight, we can fight. But in all honesty, I have spent the last 6 months researching the legal status of every will-nil named embassy on this earth. I have discovered transgression, Ambassador. So very many transgressions. Our manning patterns, our interpretations of taxation law, our failure to observe any recognizably coherent environmental policy, confusion as to the proper form of labor relations, copyright issues, trade agreements that contradict other trade agreements. The folder landed on the table with a flat bang, as though it had been struck with a gavel. If we go to court over Lorenzo's snack truck, each of these issues will become established legal precedent. Whether we win or lose, You will be setting legal patterns for every diplomatic mission in human space. And some of those missions, Ambassador, have made much more serious mistakes than simply registering a shuttle for something less than full commercial fuel. Kethva stared at the red folder as if it were a bomb, which in a sense, it was. You were threatening the entire diplomatic system. I'm not threatening you, said Margaret. I only want to explain the logical outcome of your asking me to defend a particular legal position. Lorenzo Martinez was my client. He hired me to get compensation for his destroyed food truck. If achieving that aim makes me want to challenge the basic beliefs behind our intergalactic diplomatic code, well, she shrugged. I'm very good at my work. The silence between them was stretched taut as a wire. Kethva could his own breathing, loud in the austere conference room. Somewhere in the building, a printer murmured on, producing more sheets of paper that would no doubt ruin yet another person's day. There's something else you must remember, Margaret said, her voice soft than it had been. This involves trust as well as legal precedent, Ambassador. She leaned forward from across the conference table, for the first time wearing a businesslike expression. At the moment, humans and galactic civilization coexist because whichever side honors its agreement's course. Diplomatic immunity operates as a self-regulating system. But what when humans begin to suspect that aliens are exploiting legal loopholes? In order to avoid paying consequences for their actions, she indicated the window and city beyond it. There are 8 billion human beings on this planet, Ambassador. Most of them have never met an alien, been off-world, or seen a galactic treaty. Everything they know about aliens is learnt from news broadcasts and government pronouncements. And if sooner or later those start reporting how alien diplomats ruin businesses belonging to humans, and then invoke their precious diplomatic immunity. She didn't need to complete the sentence. Kethva could see the consequences unfolding just as clearly as she did. You mean this is about more than money? I'm trying to point out that justice and law are not the same thing, Ambassador. Law comes from the words in books, treaties, as well as court decisions. Justice is the people's belief of what's right. Now, when law gets too far away from justice, something will give way. Margaret flipped through the settlement with newfound interest. Lorenzo Martinez does not want justice because he is anti-alien, or as an attack on diplomatic immunity. He wants justice because his life is ruined, utterly, with no one caring for him. She said, you pay what you owe him, correct the regulatory problems behind all this, and justice will be done, refuse, and ... She marked the red folder with her hand. We'll see whether the law of galactic diplomacy can survive human legal warfare. Looked at the settlement document, then at the red folder, and finally back to Margaret Chen with an expectant expression. Over the centuries, he had negotiated with species whose idea of compromise involved ritual disembowelment and faced down. Warlords armed only as a chalk-faced angel fresh from heaven. But there had never been anything like this trial lawyer. Here was a human being who could potentially destroy the whole basis of interstellar diplomacy in her spare time, while collecting an expensive slip for truck, incurred damage fees and other peripheral charges. If I sign this, he said slowly, and if it becomes a precedent for what you just described, how many other diplomatic missions are going to find themselves in similar situations? Margaret's expression became thoughtful. All depends, Mr. Keth, on how many diplomatic missions are now cutting regulatory corners. All of them, Mr. Kethva admitted. The recognized legal framework for the galaxy was developed in order to carry on large-scale diplomacy between star nations. It wasn't intended to cover thousands upon thousands of minutiae, because your government uses these as daily life memes. And people's regulatory devices. Then they'll all have to learn, Margaret said, with gentle finality. Or they'll all find themselves on the far side of a table. Could even be men like me that negotiate for them. She pushed the pen across to him. Ambassador, Margaret asked, will you be the one to set the pattern for these discussions, or will you be the first in line to reap a benefit and the smart one who solves it beforehand? Kethver picked up the pen, feeling its weight and wonder, as if it were made of pure neutronium. Ms. Chen, he said, I have one more question. Go ahead. Why are you doing this, really? And please don't tell me about the food truck. For a long while, Margaret was silent, gazing out of the window across the area of government buildings all the way to the far horizon. Ambassador, she said at last, do you know what humans were doing 50 years ago when the Galactic Council first made contact with Earth? Getting used to your presence among us. Killing each other, Margaret corrected. We were engaged in the third corporate wars. Billions died. Entire continents were made uninhabitable, helpless victims of interminable war. Human civilization teetered on the edge of extinction. And then the Spaniard arrived. She spun around to face him. The Galactic Council did not save us out of the kindness of its heart, Ambassador. It did so out of its own self-interest. They saved us because they needed a race that understood the business of warfare. Humans became useful to the galaxy only because of our unique talent for destruction. Margaret opened one last folder, this one holding what appeared to be historical documents. In general, the galaxy seemed to have forgotten that humans were dangerous. Instead, it began treating us like just another client species, grateful for the privilege to participate in galactic civilization, assuming that as long as proper diplomatic procedures were followed, our laws and our way of doing things could be safely ignored. She took a photograph from her pocket and laid it on the table. It was a showing a food truck, smoke still rising from rumble of the wreckage. Lorenzo Martinez is a 60-year-old man who has spent his entire life savings on that truck. He gets up every morning at 4 o'clock to prepare food, works until midnight clearing away. 7 days of the week just to make enough money for his daughter in college and mother home with the care she needs. And when an alien shuttle destroyed everything he had slaved over, your embassy's response was a form letter explaining that diplomatic immunity made compensation impossible. Her voice was no longer in its conversational state, and it became tough and personalized. So, no, Ambassador, it's not just a matter of a food truck. This is our simple reminder to the galaxies that humans are dangerous people, able to find ways anytime hurting you, unexpectedly working to our own advantage. Course, as long we can get away with it. On your side, there will be no complaints as long as everyone has the right paperwork. She leaned back in her chair, her professional exterior returning. Sign the settlement. Fix your regulatory compliance, and Lorenzo gets his life back. Deny it, and we'll see whether diplomatic immunity can survive human legal warfare. In either event, the galaxy learns something important about dealing with humans. Watching the picture of the destroyed food truck, the settlement agreement, and Margaret Chen's implacable expression, Kethver thought of his centuries of diplomatic service, his professional honor, the hope that public understanding would make decision by conference and bargaining the norm for settling international disputes. He thought then that Lorenzo Martinez was trying to rise up at 4 a.m. anymore. sorting ingredients for his business, which didn't exist, but still had to pay for college expenses and his mother's hospital stays, somehow came out of income already destroyed by a diplomatic shuttle, tangible destruction of his future, and yet no one could lay hold on the destroyer. He signed the agreement. Margaret smiled. Her expression was not predatory this time. It was satisfied instead, the face of a lawyer who had just gotten what he was paid to produce. Thanks, Ambassador. Martinez will be very happy. Ms. Chen, Kethva said, handing back the signed document. I get the feeling we'll have more talks like this one. Probably, she agreed cheerfully. It isn't always bad, Ambassador. Sometimes a system needs to be challenged if it's to keep growing properly. Sometimes you have to show that with diplomatic immunity comes responsibilities as well. With that, she quickly gathered up her folders, each one a pistol put away rather than fired. Besides, she added, now that every diplomatic mission on Earth knows what human lawyers can do when they put their minds to it, I think regulatory compliance is going to pick up dramatically. Kethva watched her pack away. The instruments of legal warfare that had just redefined his understanding of human civilization. He said to Ms. Chen, I finally understand why my predecessor asked for a transfer to the Hive Worlds. Margaret gave a short but friendly laugh. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, the Hive Worlds just want to gobble up everything on their path. Humans aim at winning. Which one is more dangerous? Kethva sat alone in the conference chamber with that settlement agreement and an entirely new understanding of the creature he had been sent to comprehend. It had taken the galaxy 50 years to learn to use humans in battle. Now it was about to discover how they were even more terrifying in peacetime. At their request, every diplomatic mission inside the boundaries of human space hired lawyers to ensure compliance. 6 months later, the Galactic Diplomatic Accord was modified to incorporate local regulatory supervision clauses. After 12 months, Margaret Chen was named the inaugural human legal advisor to the Galactic Council. It was a brand new job, and probably should never have been created. The daughter stayed in school. Lorenzo Martinez got his new taco stand, and mother received medical attention. Was justice, Kethva often thought, with a note of some wry humor. Not the austere perfection of abstract principles, but the real succor for real people whom an overwhelming force beyond their control has harmed. He acquired an appreciation for human food during the long time he was forced to remain on Earth. He had to admit that tacos were delightful